18 years old. That's when I realized I was gay. With my dance teacher, I thought I had everything figured out at 18. I was focused on college plans, hanging out with my usual friends, and pretending I understood who I really was. But then I signed up for a dance class, just to try something new, and that's when everything changed. That's when he walked in, confident, graceful, and with eyes that seemed to look right through me. I didn't know it yet, but every step I took on that dance floor would lead me closer to discovering something about myself I had spent years denying. Before we dive into this story that completely transformed my life, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happened next when a simple dance lesson turned into the most confusing and unforgettable moment of my life. I remember standing outside the dance studio, heart pounding harder than it should have. The glass walls gave me a perfect view inside. Mirrors lined every wall, and the polished wooden floor practically glowed under the bright lights. I had no idea why I felt so nervous. It was just a class, a way to break out of the boring routine I'd fallen into after turning 18. And then he walked in. Aiden. He was nothing like I imagined a dance teacher would be. He wasn't overly polished or wearing some dramatic outfit. No. He was real. A simple black t-shirt that hugged his toned chest just enough to make me swallow hard, dark jeans, and bare feet that moved as if gravity had no hold on him. And his eyes, sharp, confident, and focused, like he saw more than just who you appeared to be. "First time?" he asked as I stood frozen in the doorway, too unsure to cross the line into the studio. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah. Is it that obvious?" A slow smile formed on his lips, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. "Don't worry," he said, his voice low and smooth. "Everyone's a little awkward their first time. Just takes one step to change that." I forced myself to step inside, suddenly hyper-aware of how clumsy my feet felt against the sleek floor. The class began, and Aiden moved with a grace I couldn't understand. Every gesture seemed effortless. Meanwhile, I was struggling just to keep my balance. But he noticed. Of course he noticed. "Relax your shoulders," he said from behind me, his hands gently guiding them down. His touch was light, but it sent a shock through my entire body. My heart raced, and I could barely hear the music over the sound of my own pulse. "Better?" he murmured close to my ear. And then he moved on to help someone else, leaving me standing there, completely unraveled. I tried to focus. I really did. But my eyes kept drifting back to him. The way he moved, the way his voice carried through the room, calm but commanding. And worse, the way my stomach flipped every time he so much as looked in my direction. I didn't know what to call this feeling. It wasn't just admiration. It wasn't just that he was attractive. It was something I couldn't explain. Something that pulled at me in a way nothing else ever had. By the end of the class, my shirt clung to my back, and my legs felt like jelly. As everyone else grabbed their bags and chatted about meeting up next week, I lingered by the corner, pretending to check my phone. That's when he approached me again. "You survived," he teased, leaning casually against the mirror. "Barely," I admitted with a shaky laugh. "I'm not exactly built for this." He crossed his arms, his biceps flexing just enough to distract me. "That's where you're wrong. Dancing isn't about having the right body. It's about letting go of what holds you back." "Yeah?" I asked, trying not to sound as breathless as I felt. "And what if you're not sure what's holding you back?" Aiden's expression softened. He tilted his head slightly, as if studying me deeper than I was comfortable with. "Then you keep coming back until you figure it out," he said quietly. Sometimes the answers show up when you're ready to stop running from them. And just like that, he walked away again, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding and my mind spinning in directions I wasn't ready to face. That night, lying in bed, his words echoed in my head. What am I running from? I didn't have an answer, but for the first time in my life, I wanted to find out. And I knew exactly where I'd start, back on that dance floor with him. The following week couldn't pass fast enough. Every day felt like I was living in slow motion, counting down the hours until that class. It was ridiculous, really. One dance class, and suddenly my mind was consumed by the sound of his voice and the way his hands had barely brushed my shoulders. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was just intrigued by the novelty of it all. But every time I closed my eyes, all I could picture was him, Aiden, moving across that studio with the kind of ease I could only dream of. When I finally walked through the door again, the air felt heavier. The studio smelled faintly of polished wood and something warm. Maybe his cologne, lingering in the space like a secret. He was already there, standing near the mirror with his arms crossed, head tilted slightly as he watched the new group gather. His eyes flicked toward me, and for a heartbeat, everything else disappeared. "You came back," he said with a smile that made my legs feel unsteady. "I figured I should give this one more shot before deciding if I'm a lost cause," I joked, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "You're not a lost cause," he said simply, his gaze holding mine for a second longer than necessary before turning his attention to the group. This class felt different. Maybe it was me, or maybe it was the way Aiden's eyes seemed to find me across the room every time I stumbled. His corrections were softer, more personal. When he moved behind me again, his hands found my shoulders, warmer this time, lingering longer. "Loosen up," he said quietly, his voice low and close. "You're too tense. You're thinking too much. Feel the music. Let it guide you." I swallowed hard, focusing on my breathing, but his presence made it impossible to concentrate on anything but him. At one point, he called me to the center of the studio. "Let's try something new," he said, offering his hand. My heart nearly stopped. I placed my hand in his, and the connection sent a jolt through me that I couldn't hide. His grip was firm, his fingers warm and sure. We started moving, slowly at first. Aiden guided me through the steps, his body close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. "Relax," he murmured again, his breath brushing my ear. I couldn't tell if the pounding in my chest was from the movement or from being this close to him. My eyes kept drifting to his mouth when he spoke, wondering what it would feel like to close the distance between us. At one point, the music swelled and he spun me, an effortless movement that left me breathless when I landed back in his arms. For a moment we stood still, closer than we should have been, his hand resting at my lower back. Neither of us moved, neither of us spoke. His eyes searched mine, and in that second, I felt everything shift. The air was thick with something I didn't know how to name. Then, just as quickly, he stepped back, his expression unreadable. "That's enough for today," he announced to the class, his voice clipped, like he needed distance as much as I did. I stood there, my heart still pounding, my body aching for something I wasn't sure I was allowed to want. As people gathered their things and left, I found myself lingering again. Aiden was wiping down the mirrors, avoiding my eyes, his jaw tight. I couldn't leave without saying something, without knowing what that moment had meant. "Hey!" My voice came out softer than I intended. He turned slowly, his expression guarded. "That felt different," I admitted, my words hanging awkwardly between us. He pressed his lips together, like he was holding something back. Then he shook his head slightly. "You should get going," he said quietly. "We'll see where this goes next time." But there was something in his eyes, something he wasn't saying. And I walked out of that studio more confused than ever, wondering if I was the only one feeling this, or if he was just as lost in it as I was. That night, sleep was a stranger. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt his hand at my lower back, his breath against my ear, the weight of his eyes holding me in that moment when the music faded and everything else disappeared. I kept replaying it, searching for some hidden meaning. Was it just part of the dance? A moment of practiced intimacy meant to make the movement feel real? Or had there been something more lingering just under the surface? Something neither of us dared to name. By the time the next class arrived, my stomach was a knot of nerves and hope. I wasn't even sure why I kept going back. The dance was only half of it now. The rest was him. When I walked through the studio doors, the room was dimly lit. Aiden stood at the far end, stretching, his back muscles flexing beneath the fabric of his shirt. I swallowed hard, my feet rooted to the floor, unable to look away. He caught me watching and offered a slight nod, his face unreadable. As the class began, I tried to focus on the music, the steps, anything but the way his eyes kept flicking toward me. But no matter how hard I tried, my body seemed to move toward his, drawn like gravity had its own intentions. Halfway through, we moved into partner exercises. Just my luck, Aiden called me up first. "You ready?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. "I think so," I managed, though my voice betrayed just how uncertain I felt. We stood close again, closer than seemed necessary. His hand found my waist, fingers pressing just enough to remind me exactly where he was. His other hand slid into mine, and the warmth of his palm against mine sent a familiar shiver racing through me. We moved slowly, a new routine with steps that forced proximity. I could feel every breath he took, every slight movement of his body against mine. My chest tightened, and my thoughts spiraled out of control. At one point, the routine required me to turn into him, and I stumbled. Instinctively, he caught me, his arms slipping around my waist, pulling me flush against his chest. Time stopped. For a moment, neither of us moved. His heartbeat echoed against my cheek, and my hands landed awkwardly against his chest. I could feel the rise and fall of his breath, fast and uneven, just like mine. His head dipped slightly, his lips so close I could feel the warmth of them near my temple. "This isn't part of the lesson," I said under my breath, my voice shaking. "I know," he replied, his voice low, rougher than I'd ever heard it. "But I don't think I can pretend anymore." I pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Whatever restraint he'd been holding on to was hanging by a thread. Before I could say another word, his hand slid from my waist to my jaw, his thumb brushing the corner of my mouth. My heart slammed against my ribs, every nerve in my body screaming for him to close the distance. But instead, he stepped back, fast, like he'd just caught himself standing too close to a cliff's edge. His eyes darted away, his hands flexing nervously at his sides. "We should stop here for today," he said, his voice tight, controlled in a way it hadn't been moments before. I stood there, frozen, caught between the overwhelming desire to pull him back and the crushing fear that I'd imagined it all. Without another word, he turned and left the studio, leaving me standing in the center of the room, my heart still racing, my lips tingling from a touch that hadn't even happened. And in that painful silence, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just questioning what he felt anymore. I was finally ready to admit what I felt. And it scared me more than anything else ever had. The days after that class stretched out painfully slow. I kept expecting a message, a call, even just a meaningless check-in about the next session. But my phone stayed silent. And every time it buzzed with someone else's name, I felt that sharp, disappointing drop in my chest. For years, I thought I had mastered the art of pretending, pretending I wasn't curious, pretending those feelings didn't swirl under the surface every time I saw someone who made my heart stumble. But now, there was no pretending left. Aiden had pulled it all to the surface, and now it sat there, exposed and raw. When the next class day arrived, I debated not going. What if he wasn't there? Worse, what if he was, and acted like none of it had happened? But something stronger than fear pushed me out the door. I had to face this. I had to face him. The moment I stepped into the studio, I knew something was wrong. A different instructor stood at the front of the class, a woman I'd never seen before. She greeted everyone cheerfully, explaining that she'd be covering the class for a while. For a while? My pulse spiked, and before I could stop myself, I crossed the room to Karen, one of the regular students who always seemed to know everything. "Hey, where's Aiden?" I asked, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. She gave me a sympathetic look. "He's taking some time off. Said he needed a break." A break. Just like that, he was gone. I went through the motions of class, but nothing felt the same. Every move felt mechanical. Every song felt like a reminder of the moment we'd shared and the kiss that almost happened but didn't. By the end of the session, I couldn't take it anymore. I found myself outside the studio, scrolling through my phone, my thumb hovering over his contact. Just text him. Say something. But before I could hit send, a notification popped up. A social media post from the studio's page. Aiden Monroe is stepping away for personal reasons. We wish him the best during this time of reflection and growth. Reflection and growth? It felt like the most polite way to say he was running. From me, from himself, from whatever nearly happened between us. Frustrated, I shoved my phone back into my pocket and started walking, not even sure where I was headed. My feet led me through the city streets, past familiar coffee shops and bookstores, until I found myself at the small park near the river. I sat on a bench, watching the water move steadily by, wondering if I had misread everything. Maybe it had all been in my head. The glances, the lingering touches, the way his voice dropped when he spoke to me. Maybe that was just who he was. But deep down, I knew better. I had felt it. The hesitation, the longing, the fear. And then, just when I was about to give up, I heard a voice. Soft, uncertain. "I didn't think you'd be here." I turned around, and there he was. Aiden. Standing a few feet away, his hands buried in his pockets, his eyes filled with the same storm I'd seen that night in the studio. I stood up, my voice catching in my throat. "Where have you been?" He took a shaky breath. "Trying to figure out if I'm brave enough to be the person I really am." His words hit me like a punch to the chest. I swallowed hard, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly and scare him off. "And?" I asked, my voice barely holding together. His eyes met mine, raw and vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. "I'm here, aren't I?" In that single moment, all the distance, all the confusion felt like it was leading to this. But before I could step toward him, before I could say the words sitting heavy on my tongue, he shook his head softly. "Not here. Not yet," he whispered. "But soon, if you're still willing to wait." And just like that, he turned and walked away again. I sat back down, my heart breaking and hoping all at once. Was I willing to wait? I had no idea. But I already knew I wouldn't be able to walk away. Days blurred into each other after that night at the park. I kept telling myself not to wait around, not to hold my breath for someone who wasn't sure if he was ready. But no matter what I did, who I saw, where I went, his words echoed through my mind. Not here. Not yet. But soon, if you're still willing to wait. How do you move on from something that never even really started? And then, just as I was starting to convince myself to forget, it happened. It was a Saturday night, the city alive with music and lights, and I'd let a friend drag me out to a rooftop party. I wasn't in the mood to socialize, but standing alone in my apartment felt worse. The air on the rooftop was cool, and the soft hum of conversations blended with the faint thump of music from below. I stood near the edge, watching the skyline, when I felt a presence behind me, close enough that the hairs on my arms stood up before I even turned around. "Didn't think I'd find you here." Aiden's voice came low and uncertain. I turned slowly, my chest tightening at the sight of him. He looked tired but softer somehow, like a man who had finally stopped running, even if he wasn't sure where to go next. "You have a habit of showing up when I'm about to give up on you," I said, trying to keep my tone light, but the weight behind the words was impossible to hide. His eyes dropped for a second before meeting mine again. "I know," he admitted, "and I hate that I've done that to you. But I couldn't keep pretending, or denying what this is." He took a small step closer, the space between us shrinking until every inch of my body was aware of his. "I thought if I pushed you away, if I kept my distance, it would be easier, but it's not. It's worse," he confessed, his voice rough with honesty. "I'm scared of what this means, of what it means about me, but I'm more afraid of not finding out." My heart hammered in my chest, my breath shallow as every part of me screamed to close the final distance between us. "You don't have to have it all figured out," I whispered. "I don't either. But I'm here. Right here." And then, as if the tension between us snapped under its own weight, he closed the space, his hand reaching up to brush my cheek. His touch was tentative, like he was still asking for permission. I leaned into his palm, my eyes closing at the warmth of it. And then, finally, his lips found mine. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't some cinematic, flawless kiss. It was hesitant, a little shaky, full of every ounce of fear and relief we'd both been carrying for far too long. But it was real, and it was everything. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine, his breath shaky. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. I smiled faintly, my hand resting against his chest, feeling his heart pounding wildly. "We'll figure it out together," I promised. But just as that fragile moment of peace settled over us, someone called his name from across the rooftop. Aiden stiffened. His hand dropped, and the panic I'd seen before returned to his eyes. I have to go," he said, his voice distant again. "Aiden." I reached for him, but he was already stepping away. "Just give me a little more time," he called back, before disappearing into the crowd. And once again, I stood there, alone in the aftermath, my heart full and breaking at the same time. He had kissed me. He'd finally let himself feel it. But would he let himself stay? That was the question I couldn't escape as the night swallowed him whole. I didn't see Aiden for weeks after that rooftop night. Every day I wondered if that kiss had been his way of saying hello, or his silent goodbye. And yet, despite the distance, I couldn't forget the way his lips had trembled against mine, or how his hands had held me like I was the first safe place he'd ever known. One evening, just as the city lights began to flicker on and the air smelled like approaching rain, there was a knock at my door. I opened it, and there he stood, wet from the light drizzle, eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Certainty. He didn't say a word. He just stepped forward, took my face in his hands, and kissed me like he had spent every second apart realizing what he couldn't live without. When he finally pulled back, his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here," he said. "No more running. If you'll have me, I'm ready to stop being afraid." Tears welled up in my eyes before I could stop them. I pulled him inside, closed the door behind us, and for the first time, it felt like we were exactly where we were supposed to be. No promises for the future, no perfect declarations. Just two people, finally brave enough to stand still and hold on to what mattered. And sometimes, that's all love really needs. If this story touched your heart, remember, life's most beautiful moments often begin the second we stop running from ourselves. Take that first step, and you might just find what's been waiting for you all along. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to believe that it's never too late to choose love.